Right. So the Lynx stores and all of our tours that go to Coto Doñana are based in this bizarre little town of El Rocío, near Huelva in southern Spain. It's a bizarre town because most of the streets are sandy and people go around on horseback rather than cars. Here's the church overlooking the Marismas here, the wetlands, and our hotel, the Hotel Toruño, is just to the right of the field of view here, overlooking the marshes. It's almost like the set of a spaghetti western. It's almost unique in my experience in Europe, and it's a remarkable place. On our Coto Doñana holidays, just a short bird watching trip at different times of the year, you come down here for 4 nights, all in the Hotel Toruño, and go out into the park and the wider natural park on a daily basis. Our Lynx holidays have 2 nights here and then 3 nights up in the Andújar National Park. And the mixed holiday that we run, that some of you have done, I can see from the comments, some of you have done the combination between Coto Doñana and the wide open steppes in Extremadura. That's our Coto Doñana and Extremadura holiday. And actually, Nikki and Simon are off north tomorrow to Extremadura for our Christmas break, 7 days in Extremadura over Christmas. That's if the rains abate, because Spain's had some torrential rain over the past couple of weeks with some quite severe floods. Now, they need rain, but it's unfortunate when it all arrives at once and floods the otherwise dry landscape. So this is Doñana. This is the front of the Hotel Toruño. It's what I'd call quite a rustic, 2-ish star Spanish inn, really. It's typical Andalusian. The welcome's warm. The rooms are not luxurious, but there's a comfortable bed, plenty of hot water showers, ensuite facilities, and good traditional Andalusian fare served in the hotel restaurant. What if you can pick out these funny wooden structures here outside the front of the bar? You might be wondering what those are. Well, they're so the local townsfolk can enjoy cold beer in the evening without dismounting from their steed. That's something you don't see in the UK too often. But the locals love their horses, and these guys are just back out from days tending the paddy fields, no doubt. Dotted around the town, in the environs of the town, you'll see plenty of white storks. You've just seen in the migration routes, vast flocks of these birds moving overhead. They'll nest around the El Rocío region, vast, rough kind of collections of sticks here built up sometimes over many years. And if you look carefully, bottom right of the image there and central as well, you can see the kind of sub-nests of Spanish sparrows using the lower reaches of the storks' nests to build their own much smaller nests. White storks are seen occasionally in southern England. There's been a reintroduction program with the Knepp estate down in Sussex, which some of you may have visited. But you will get a feel here, step out of the van into the warmth of the Andalusian sunshine, and it has a very Mediterranean feel. Just a quick word about the history of the Coto Doñana National Park. And a book recommendation, any of you that are interested in the history of ornithological surveys in Spain and the birth of Coto Doñana National Park, I really recommend this book by Guy Mountfort, which is readily available online at secondhand booksellers. I've got my own copy next to me here. And it's a really fascinating read, because back in the early 1950s, this is what, mid-Franco era, there was a very real threat to the wider Doñana region. There were big plans to drain it for agriculture and for the wide-scale planting of eucalyptus trees. But Guy Mountfort, with some other eminent British naturalists of the time, was invited down by a Spanish family who were keen naturalists and owned a large section of the reserve, and they mounted 3 ornithological expeditions from 1956 onwards, all of which are described in detail in this book here, Portrait of a Wilderness. It's amazing how things have changed over the last 65 years, because back in the back in the mid-1950s, the idea of a package holiday was really just in its infancy, wasn't it? And nobody then had really thought about a bird watching holiday overseas. In the UK in the 50s, we were still in a kind of era of egg collecting rather than enjoying birds. But Guy Mountfort went across with his expeditions and catalogued some kind of data and sightings now, which we just take for granted. For example, the date of the first arrival, great spotted cuckoo, when Spanish imperial eagles breed, etc., etc. So well recommended, that book there. Guy Malthorpe came back to the UK in the late 50s, wrote up his expeditions, and it's safe to say without that work and the wide focus and spotlight shone on the park, it would have been lost and we wouldn't have this fantastic wilderness to enjoy today. Malthorpe went on to found WWF World Wildlife Fund for Nature in 1961, which Simon mentioned in his talk. And although there are threats to Doñana these days, particularly the encroachment of major dual carriageways and large-scale rice paddies and strawberry greenhouses, we do have this wonderful natural resource in Spain to enjoy. I led what we think is the first ever commercial lynx watching holiday back in 2006. We've done a lot of tours since, most of which Byron has led himself. But I led a series of birding holidays for Naturetrek to Doñana from about 1999 to 2002. And we reckon during that period, for about every 50 hours or so spent in lynx habitat, you might be lucky enough to get a glimpse of a lynx in the undergrowth. But back in those days, the population of lynx was really holding on by a thread. You can see a representation here, 5,000 territorial breeding adult lynx in 1960 compared to a greatly diminished population in 2016 of 483 adult viable individuals. But this is even more stark. So 2003, which is about when I stopped leading that long series of birding tours, you can see lynx were restricted to just tiny pockets of land around the Doñana area, and then up to the other side of Cordoba in the Andújar National Park. But between 2003, 2004, 2005, when there was a very real threat, the lynx would go out of existence due to fantastic efforts by Spanish conservationists and EU funding. The breadth of coverage of lynx territories had greatly expanded by 2016. And moving forward to the present day, lynx numbers are very much on the up, both in Doñana and do have also the Montes de Toledo up to the north there, and a successful reintroduction program just north of the Algarve over the Portuguese border. So for the 25 years I've been involved in tourism in Spain, things have never looked brighter for the Iberian lynx population. And it's great to be able to kind of talk about this good news story in a world in which there's so much negativity and things to be worried about. Just another representation here of how those numbers have gone up just after the dark days of the turn of the new millennium to over 500 breeding viable individuals now in 2022. So let's take a look at the wider Doñana National Park and what it has in store for visitors who are keen to go and see the bird life. Well, this is what Doñana is best known for. Vast open marshes full of water in April, arguably the best time of year to be there for the birds because all the summer migrants are just arriving. Terns are on the wing, etc. Warblers and nightingales are calling from every bush. It's just a lovely time to be in Doñana. See a large flock of flamingos over there in the distance. But this shot doesn't really do the marshes justice. But we'll get up close and comfortable with a range of breeding waders in summer plumage. Curlew sandpiper was mentioned earlier this evening, African spoonbills, black-winged stilt, all of these birds, enigmatic Mediterranean species, a sight for sore eyes if you've spent the winter in the UK. Back end of the year, water rails are common around Erythea, not so much in the spring and summer. And we might just be lucky enough on occasions to see otters in the marshes where it passes under one of the roads. On the other side of the Guadalquivir River and Doñana is essentially the inland delta of the Guadalquivir River. So on the eastern side of the river, and we'll take a small ferry over one day or maybe drive the loop around past Seville. We'll come down on the eastern side of the delta to some old sole pans, and this is a great spot for slender-billed gull, one of Europe's most sought-after gull species. It's one of the best places to see this bird. Purple gallinule is a bird that the Romans used to take for the pot, but another quintessential Mediterranean species that we like to get up close and enjoy. One of my favourite wading species, the dainty wood sandpiper, is common around Doñana in the spring and early summer. And red-knobbed or crested coot is another key Doñana target, but this shot isn't necessarily representative of how easy it is to see this particular species. More often you're confronted with 300 or 400 coots, 400 or 500 meters range, and you need to painstakingly scan through them all with a telescope. And at that kind of range, it's quite hard to see these red nodules on the forehead of the coot, and normally the giveaway is the bluish sheen to the bill there, whereas our Eurasian coot is ivory white. So it's normally the bill colour that stands out in a flock rather than the red nodules there. Squacco herons, fresh in from Africa during April, and some of the more secretive denizens of the park. Well, one of them is the marble teal, one of Europe's most beautiful ducks. These birds like very much the quiet, more secluded corners of the park, and the best way to see them is to take a four-wheel drive excursion into the national park, and we'll spend the morning looking for some of the more secretive, reclusive species. Pintailed sandgrouse will be enjoyed through telescopes, if not binoculars. And these are the kinds of Mediterranean birds which really fired my imagination. As a 7-year-old flicking through my dad's book of the birds of Europe, I just thought one day I'd love to see these birds, and a dream came true a few years later. But you can't get enough of, bee-eaters, rollers, hoopoes, all of these wonderfully colourful, enigmatic European birds. Overhead, plenty of raptors to enjoy. Booted eagles, about the same size and shape as a buzzard, but they come in a light morph, such as this male, and also a dark morph, which needs sometimes careful study to distinguish it from a buzzard. But good to see those birds overhead. And as I say, in April, certainly through to early May, nightingales singing from every bush. And memorably, we had one person one year who had a nightingale in the bush outside their bedroom window, and said she couldn't get to sleep at night because nightingale was singing all night long. But what a beautiful melodic tune. Very rare in southern England, but all over the place in Doñana in the right time of year. Another summer migrant that's pretty difficult to see home here in the UK, but fairly common in southern Spain as birds move north in late March and April, the wryneck, beautiful member of the woodpecker family, and the aforementioned Spanish sparrows, ubiquitous around the rural landscapes of Roadshow. Iberian magpie, I prefer the old name of azure winged magpie, another bird with a curious distribution actually, well known in southern Spain and down in the Algarve in Portugal, but its other population is in the Far East. Not quite sure how the two populations became so disparate, but Iberian magpie is another key target species for birders within the group. Which brings me on to the subject of the almost mythical Iberian lynx. As I say, almost lost in the early part of the millennium, but making a strong comeback. And I think one of the old adages on a birding tour is often the best bird of the day is a mammal. And in Doñana, if our groups have been lucky enough to see a lynx, it dominates the evening conversation, regardless of what birds we've seen, Spanish imperial eagle or whatever else we've managed to locate. The lynx will be talk of the town. And what we need to do to try to find lynx in Doñana is to take large safari trucks out into the rutted, sandy tracks of the national park. Back in the 1980s, it was more of a free-for-all, and British birders back then, pioneering birders, got a bad name for themselves by driving into these sandy areas and getting their Ford Cortinas stuck to have to be towed out by Spanish farmers. But it's all quite regulated these days. You can't go into the protected zone unless you're with a locally licensed tour operator, which I think is a good idea for the park protection and visitor numbers in general. But just inside the park gates, we will examine the tracks, and the local guides will take great delight in pointing out any fresh tracks from that morning. And on a red letter day, you might just get a wonderful sight of a lynx crossing the road in front of us. This shot taken by the late Peter Dunn, Miss Peter, one of our tour leaders, who was so active with us until he lost his battle against cancer and COVID during lockdown 2 years ago. But he was leading this tour with Byron, actually. I think it must have been about 2016. and they had this magnificent encounter. I should just say that we get people on our lynx stores who want to photograph a lynx and take back high quality snaps, but I just would add a word of caution here that an encounter like this is an exception, and the more normal sighting you get of a lynx is one kind of in the dappled shade under a bush, scratching itself or sleeping, or you might see that characteristic stubby black tail disappearing off into the bush. So to get one out in the open like this is unusual and lucky for the participants on the tour. So if you're a keen photographer and want to explore photographic opportunities, the best bet would be to book a private trip and station yourself in one of the hides up in Andújar. Very different type of tour that, because you need to be very patient and be expected to stay for 10 or 12 hours without moving in a hide, in the hope that a lynx might come down to a waterhole. But that's your best bet to get some quality shots. Lynx are breeding in both locations, in Doñana and up in Andújar. You'd be very lucky indeed to get a view like this. But it's just worth touching on some of the work going on behind the scenes to help conserve the lynx. The problem with two populations so widely distributed and with the conurbation of Seville and several major arteries and motorways in between them is there's no natural gene flow between the two populations. So a lot of the work that's been going on in the early 2000s involved taking breeding viable males from the Andújar population and coming down and mating them with the Doñana population to create that all-important gene mix. Otherwise, you run into problems with infantile death and other diseases. So it's absolutely vital that that gene pool is mixed. And there's a lynx breeding conservation centre just to the west of Doñana National Park. We can't go in for perhaps obvious reasons. Sterility and the vulnerability of these young kittens, but some friends who work at the centre were kindly provided these shots, and the lynx are kept in large outdoor pens. Once they finish nuzzling from the mother, then they're given a health check, radio collared, and released off into Doñana, with the under road tunnel there just being one of the measures that have been taken to try to limit deaths on the road, which is one of the biggest threats to lynx in Doñana. The problem is, though the park's quite extensive, the core protected area 50 square miles, the larger natural park 210 square miles. Lynx are territorial, so if you have a young male, he will have a natural urge to escape from the family territory and spread out and find his own territory. But as I said earlier, the national park is really ringed by motorways, big rice paddy fields, and particularly strawberry greenhouses. So it can be difficult for young lynx to go off and find suitable territory. So to widen the territory available to young lynx is something that's being worked upon, and a continual remixing of the gene pool, as I mentioned earlier. But if you're lucky in Doñana, might just be lucky enough to get a wonderful photographic opportunity like this one. The second part of our lynx watching holiday involves a drive up the motorway past Seville and Cordoba to Andújar National Park, where we spend 3 nights, 4 days. And the nature of our lynx watching here is very different to Doñana. There we're very much confined to safari truck with limited time on foot, whereas here our attention changes to finding a key panoramic viewpoint, and we make ourselves comfortable, line telescopes up, and scan this rather varied and quite difficult terrain for any movement in the undergrowth. 9 times out of 10, when you see a movement, it will be a raven or a wild boar or a red deer. But when you finally realize you've got a lynx in your telescope or binocular field of view, your heart races and your throat dries up, and you try to get the rest of the group onto it. And it's one of those exhilarating experiences to see a lynx in its open habitat. All around are reminders in Spanish to moderate our speed zone of the Iberian Lynx. As I say, roadkills are one of the biggest threats to these cats. And some of the other wildlife we are enjoying is, as I said, red deer. But just if we're lucky, the key area is called La Lancha. It's a stony track, and you look down over a ravine. Up to the left is a large dam and a reservoir. And on the valley side opposite is the old ruined village that the people that constructed the dam used to live when it was all constructed. But it's all abandoned now, and the kind of stony, sun-baked habitat full of rabbits is ideal territory for lynx. This is last year's offspring. But that's the kind of typical view that Byron might be showing you through his telescope as our morning scanning session progresses. And just the cat in his majesty, in his environment. We might have enjoyed eagle owls, Spanish imperial eagle overhead, but nobody really relaxes until we see a lynx. And it's one of the most iconic wildlife spectacles in Western Europe, without a shadow of a doubt.